Welcome to Scary Corner. Today, I am sharing 3 real horror short stories from people around the world that I found on the internet. These are simple horror experiences. No plot twists, no jump scares. So, let's sit back and listen to the stories. Brian lived in an old apartment in 2002. The building was originally constructed in 1900. So by the time he moved in, it was already over 100 years old. Most of the rooms in Brian's apartment looked fine, except the bathroom and the bedroom. From the moment he saw the bedroom, Brian felt uneasy, as if he was constantly being watched. There was a closet in the bedroom, and when the closet door was open, the uncomfortable feeling only got worse. Strangely, the eerie feeling would fade when the closet was closed. Only then did the room feel somewhat normal. One night, Brian was sound asleep when he was suddenly startled by a loud knock on his front door. He was terrified, but gathered enough courage to get out of bed and check around the apartment. Nothing seemed out of place, so he returned to the bedroom, only to be reminded of the closet. He never dared to open it. Only then did the room feel somewhat normal. No matter what, he always kept it shut. About a month after the knocking incident, something even scarier happened. One night, Brian woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. He felt a heavy pressure, like something was holding him down. His room was completely dark because he always turned off the light before sleeping. Even in the darkness, he sensed someone was standing near his bed. Panicking, he reached for the lamp beside him. And when the light came on, there was no one there. From that night on, Brian always slept with the lights on. At one point, his friends came over to visit. Strangely, every one of them said they felt uncomfortable using the bathroom, as if someone was watching them. It wasn't just one person. Everyone who visited had the same feeling. Eventually, Brian decided to move to another unit. Oddly, every new tenant who moved into his old apartment would also leave within a few months. Brian believed it was the same ghost disturbing them. He later told the apartment manager about the strange experiences and said that the unit might be haunted. The manager just laughed and didn't take him seriously. Years later, the building was renovated. Brian ran into the manager and the building owner again, and they invited him to look around. The place looked much better now, less creepy. Brian shared his experience, and to his surprise, the owner revealed something chilling. A former tenant had died by suicide inside that closet. Even more disturbing, the architect who originally designed the building had lived and died in that very apartment. Brian was shocked, but after everything he had experienced, it all made sense. Let's move on to the next story. This next story is about Grace, who heard a baby crying in her uncle's house. When Grace was in junior high school, she lived with her uncle and aunt because their house was closer to her school. They owned a beautiful two-story home with a swimming pool. In her free time, Grace would often help her aunt take care of her 2 little cousins, who were 3 and 6 years old. She loved spending time with them, and her uncle would give her a few dollars every time she helped, which made it even more fun. One day, Grace was sitting in her bedroom, scrolling through her phone, when she suddenly heard the sound of a baby crying. She assumed it was one of her cousins, although it didn't really sound like a toddler's cry. Since the crying wouldn't stop, she decided to go downstairs and check. She called out to her aunt, but there was no response. The crying continued. She searched the first floor but couldn't find anyone. When she looked out the window, she saw her aunt and both cousins playing outside. Goosebumps covered her skin. A chill ran down her spine. She quickly ran outside to be with them, and even as she closed the door behind her, the crying sound was still there. Years later, during a family gathering, Grace brought up the strange event. Her aunt and uncle weren't surprised. In fact, They admitted that they had also heard the sound of a baby crying many times. But over time, they'd grown used to it. Her uncle explained that the previous owners had lost a baby to SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. In one of the upstairs rooms, Grace's aunt, a devout Catholic, eventually held a mass to bless the baby's spirit. Ever since then, the crying was never heard again. Let's move on to the next story. This next one is about a group of teenagers who thought summoning spirits would be fun, until something answered. In his early high school years, Chris often hung out with friends who enjoyed playing with the supernatural. One night, they gathered at his house to mess around with an old Ouija board. There were 7 of them that night. Chris's parents were out on a business trip, leaving the house eerily quiet. They'd played before. Nothing had ever happened. It was just for fun. But this time felt different. One girl in the group had never used a Ouija board before and was both nervous and excited. The rest of them had planned to scare her. They sat in a circle, placed their fingers on the planchette, and began the session. At first, the board spelled out gibberish, words that didn't make sense. The group laughed, accusing each other of messing around. But then things shifted. The board began spelling something strange. A boy, age 10, died in the 1800s, buried in the area. No grave, no marker. The room fell quiet. One of them asked for proof, some kind of sign that the spirit was really there. K, N, O, C, K. Then it went still. Seconds later, a knock came at the window right next to them. They jumped. No one was outside. As if that wasn't enough. The lights flickered. Just for a moment. That was it. The game ended. Some kind of sign that the spirit was really there. They packed up the board in silence, each of them shaken in their own way. For the rest of the night, they distracted themselves with video games, waiting for Chris's parents to return. After that night, none of them ever touched a Ouija board again. And that's the end of tonight's stories. If you have a horror story you'd like to share, feel free to send it to the email below. I'd love to hear your experiences. Subscribe for more horror stories, and I'll meet you again in the scary corner.